Well, hello everyone. This is Dustin from Tech for Humans. Today we're talking about Unity. We're talking about Unity specifically as it relates to JavaScript and variables. This isn't necessarily the final header video, but I'm just going to jump right into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Unity, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about what variables are, how they work, and how to work with them inside of Unity. So if we look at Unity, we have the hierarchy, which is a list of everything in our 3D scene. Our 3D scene itself, including a main camera, a directional light. We also have our project panel and our console down here at the bottom, as well as our inspector, which contains everything about our game objects and anything that we have selected inside of Unity. Up here along the top, we also have our play button, and that's pretty much like the quick crash course for the layout, at least as it relates to this video. So let's get started. We're going to right click down in the project panel, and we're going to go ahead and create a new JavaScript. And I'm just going to call this my var, V-A-R, that's capital M and capital V. And this is just a way for me to keep notes. So we'll just go ahead and hit enter there. We're going to open this up in what's called MonoDevelop. MonoDevelop is an external code editor for Unity. It sometimes takes a little bit of time to boot up. Just go ahead and be patient. As long as you hear the hard drive revving up and opening something, it should work in just a moment. So we'll just give that a little time there. All right, here we go. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about variables, and there's a difference between the variables that we're going to be talking about. There are two different types, largely. There's global variables, which are used everywhere inside of a script, and then there are member variables, which are usually used only inside of functions. Again, today we're only talking about global variables. So let's keep track of what you would keep or what you would use a global variable for. Well, a global variable would be used for keeping track of, let's say, dynamic information, things that are going to change in the scene. This could be your speed, it could be your health, it could be items that you have in your inventory, it could be whether or not you have an item, whether or not you've been in an area before, anything, right? Everything that you're going to do inside of a game or an interactive technology or any kind of environment is going to be boiled down to that basic type of information. As complex as it is, it's really just tracked and simple, logical information. So let's talk about the anatomy of a variable really quick. First of all, variables go at the top of a script. So up here above all your other functions, we're going to go ahead and make a little space, right? We're first going to add in a public or private declaration. So in this case, I'm going to go public, right? And this says that I want to be able to see this variable in the inspector. Now, by default, Unity allows you to see it in there anyway, but this is good practice just to be clear about it. The next keyword is going to be the var keyword, V-A-R, lowercase. You'll notice that it turns blue. This tells the engine that this is going to be a variable, so reserve a little bit of space in memory for the small information that might be changing. We're going to give it a name, and this can be anything. Generally, you want this to be whatever this information really is, something descriptive, and you're going to use multiple letters. Now, I like to use bacon as an example, so I'm going to use my bacon, right? Something that's clearly not built into Unity. It doesn't look like code. It's got to be something I made up. Well, what you do is you lowercase the first letter, always. If there's a second word, you capitalize it. So if this was just going to be bacon, it'd be lowercase bacon. But in this case, it's my bacon, so it'll become uppercase bacon. We'll go ahead and hit space, and we'll add in a colon. What this does is this tells Unity that you're going to be giving it a type of information. And here we see byte, decimal, double, float, integer, long, object, so on. Tons of different types of information that we could use, but we're just going to go ahead and flag this as a Boolean, right? This is, excuse me, it says byte Boolean. All right. This is the data type itself, right? So if the colon says there's going to be a type right after this, this is where we actually specify what kind of information this is. We'll go into that in a second. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to assign a value, which we're going to use the equal signs for. This is different than a comparison operator. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. We're saying that this Boolean is equal to, in this case, false. All right, so this is our value. False string does it to me every time. And then we put in a semicolon. Now the semicolon is the computer's way of saying this is the end of the command. Right? All of our information that we need for this line of code is right here. It starts at public variable and ends right here. So let's get a look at this. Let's just go ahead and make some notes on this. We'll hop on over to Photoshop, paste it into our document, and talk about it. So this right here, public, says that this will become visible in the inspector. We'll take a look at what that means in a minute. Variable says this is going to be a variable. Our variable name here is a name that is descriptive of what this variable is. Now you can use this exact same variable name in multiple scripts as long as it doesn't conflict with the scripts that you're currently writing them in. That sounds a little strange, but just know that its scope is limited to the script that this is written in. Always, always, lowercase the first letter, uppercase the second letter, or the first letter of the second word, basically. Here, we have to put this in, otherwise it's not going to understand we're about to issue it a type. Otherwise it might confuse it with more variable names. This is specifying what type of information it is. This could be a whole slew of different things, but these are usually either a script that you've written or a predefined logical type like Boolean, integer, string, floats, vector threes, whatever. If we're going to assign a value, and this can be optional, we're going to put an equal sign to specify that this variable of this type is equivalent to this type of information. In this case, I put false. I could have put true if I wanted, but I don't need to. I can put false, true. If it is not assigned a value, it's going to be automatically false. Right here, where we see our semicolon, this means end of line. Not every line of code needs this, but anytime that we're assigning a value or issuing a command, we always need to see a semicolon. All right? Okay, moving on. So, there are some things you want to keep in mind about dealing with Unity. So let's run over to Unity. We'll save this off, hit Control S, and we'll run back over to Unity really quick. We're going to assign our script to our main camera, and this is mainly just so that we can get a nice, clean, easy view on this and not have to worry about it. So we'll just drag the script over here. Keep in mind that when you're using a script, especially if it's a mono behavior or something that is intended to be in the scene or not a class on its own, you cannot use it unless it's actually in the scene. In this case, we'll take a look. My bacon is actually separated. It's capitalized this letter and put in a space. If we follow a logical naming convention, i.e. going lowercase my, capital bacon, and jamming all those words together, Unity will actually make it easier to read in the inspector. You'll notice that there's a checkbox here, which allows us to check this to be true or false. Now, I want you to notice something. I'm going to check this to be true and look back over in the inspector. This still reads as false. So there's an important rule to remember here when it comes to variables. Anytime you change something in the inspector that is different from the code, what is in the inspector will take precedence. So you can't just say, okay, I'm going to make it true here, and then I'm going to leave it false here and assume it's false. That's not going to be the case. We have to keep in mind what's in our inspector. All right. So that is a basic Boolean value. Now to make this a little bit clearer, especially as it relates to public, I'm going to change this to private really quick. Private. Oh boy. We'll just save this off again. Now, if we set this to a private variable, you'll notice, or it should, re-import our script. Yep, there it is. Our myBacon is actually gone. This means that the variable that we want is protected. It means that people who are working in the inspector will not have access to that value. And that's pretty important when you're dealing with something that's sensitive. So that's just a way of locking it down and making it not visible. You don't have to specify private or public, but it is good practice to, and it makes it much more clear for other people to read. So I'm just going to leave it as public for now. Public. Let's save that off and call it good. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and change the name of my bacon to my bool, because I'm dealing with a Boolean value here. So we'll just call this bool ball, just to keep it clear. So let's talk about a Boolean value. A Boolean value is a way of tracking whether or not something is on or off, open or closed, yes or no, 1 or 0, inside or outside, do I have the object or not. So if we were using a video game example, do I have the Master Sword? Yes or no? I can't say I've kind of got the Master Sword. It doesn't really work that way. I either have it or I don't. There's no middle ground. This is probably in my opinion, a very commonly used one, especially early on when you're scripting, because it's very easy to work with. So let's talk about another variable type. Let's talk about an integer, right? So I'm going to go private, excuse me, public. Got me thinking about the private ones. Var, keyword again. And I'm going to go my int. This stands for integer, right? I'm going to set up my colon to specify the type. I'm going to specify the type as int, or int. This is a lowercase int. I'm going to give it an initial value of 0. And end it with a semicolon. Now this is important because this is for basic counting. So let's run over to Unity and get a look at this really quickly. Let's see. There we go. All right. An integer, if we just grab this value here, hover over the words, and move this left and right, this actually becomes positive and negative values, but this is in whole numbers, right? This isn't 1.1, 1.5. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. You'll notice again that my values here are not reflected in the code. So I need, so when I'm assigning an initial value, and I really should, if I don't, this is going to be 0 anyway. If I don't assign a value in the inspector, or if I do assign a value in the inspector, it's going to override what's in this variable here, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and set this back to 0 for now. Now, keep in mind, even though I set this to 0, and these are equivalent, it will no longer pay attention to what is here. I might as well not have any value here. And that would be okay for the most part. But in my opinion, it's good practice when you're initially writing scripts and you're learning about scripting in general to just go ahead and put a value in here. So an integer is counting. This is how many rupees you have. What's your kill count? It could be how many full meters you are from an obstacle, right? Whole units, whole numbers. There are no half rupees. There's no half dollars. It's all whole numbers, things that you can count. How many objectives do you have left? How many keys do you have? How many bottles do you have? Things like that. Stuff that just keeps track of, I have 1, I have 2, I have 3, I have 4. The next value is going to be a float. All right, so I'm going to go again. Public var sets up my variable. I'm going to go my float. All right. You'll notice that I'm following that exact same convention as before. I'm going to set my type as float. This is a lowercase float. I'm going to give it a value of 1.5 and use my semicolon to specify the end of a line, and hit save. A float is a way of keeping track of speed, distance. Let's go look at this in the inspector really quick. All right. Import. All right. The float value, if I hover over it with my mouse, you'll notice that if I slowly drag it over, it's going to go into 4.85, 4.94, right? This is fractions of numbers. This is dealing with speed, values, or speed, rotation, scale. All those things that need to incrementally scale over time are done with our variables, our float values. So that's a pretty common one. You'll see that one quite a bit. We'll just go ahead and set that back to 1.5. Again, if you set this in the inspector, it will override what is in the code. The next one is actually a little difficult to punch into MonoDevelop, and that's because of the auto-fill options. It will change this to something that it should not be. So in this case, I'm going to just call this my string. Now you might be thinking, string, that doesn't make so much sense. String's not a data type necessarily. It's just a thread put together. In this case, let's just finish typing this out. You'll notice that I tried to capitalize it, but it actually automatically lowercased it, and that's not acceptable. I need this one alone to be capitalized, otherwise it's not going to work. I'm going to make this equivalent to a word. Now this is very important. A string is a special type of information. I'm going to put this in quotes, and I'm going to use bacon. I'm just going to capitalize bacon. Go outside of my quotes, hit a semicolon. A string deals with actual words. Now this is important. A computer has no idea what bacon means. It knows what false is, it knows what 0 is, it knows what 1.5 is, it knows how to process that information and work with it. But bacon is kind of abstract. How do you teach a computer to love and appreciate and work with bacon? Well, you really can't. A computer doesn't think that way. So think of strings as things that interface with people. And that's an important principle. Now, strings are also useful for adding in some modularity to code. We'll learn that in another lesson. But it's useful to remember that words can be used in code just as much as numbers. Now, anytime that you're going to use a string, you must remember you have to put it in quotes. Otherwise, it's not going to make any sense. So those are the basic variable types. They're very handy to remember. I use these quite commonly. Remember that you can set, I'll just go ahead and actually save this off, print it, head over to Photoshop so we can make a few notes on this. All right. All variables should have a public or private setting. All variables have to be declared as a variable. They need a variable name. This is where it will be used in code later. Anytime you're using code down here in the bottom, you will be able to refer to variables up here. We use the colon to set up a type. In this case, it is a Boolean type, an integer type, a float type, and a string type. We use our assignment operator, or the equal sign, to give it a value. In this case, we're going to have false, 0, 1.5, and bacon. And then lastly, all of these have to have a colon at the end, or excuse me, a semicolon at the end. Commonly, if you're going to be checking your code, and if it does not have those, that's probably going to be a problem. It's going to throw an error, and that's not going to be a lot of fun. Remember, name your variable something that's logical, something that makes sense for what they're being used. Down here, you don't name them X. It's not quite like algebra, where you're just going X, 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 and so on. So let's just do a quick demonstration of what some of these variables can do in terms of code. I'm going to use my update function down here, and I'll explain more in depth about how these work in another lesson. But let's go ahead and use our float variable for basic rotation. Transform.rotate. Right. All right. Now, Here I'm grabbing the transform of my game object. This is the game object that this is attached to. I'm going to have to reassign this in Unity here in a minute. This is using dot notation, so it's going to use the transform class, or the transform of this object, and use the rotate function on it. And the rotate function has 3 what are called arguments. Again, that's, I think, for a lesson for a different day. But it takes 3 values. Right? In this case, we're going to set our center value to be 50, right? So we've got 1, 0 here, separated by a comma, another value here, separated by a comma, and 1 more value. In this case, we're going to have the center one be 50 for just a moment. We'll just save this, run back to Unity. I'm going to remove my script from my camera. I'm just going to right-click on it, go Remove Component. I'm going to add a game object, a 3D game object, to my scene. I'm just going to make sure that it's zeroed out and visible from my game view. I'm going to drag my script right onto that. Now, if I look at my code, what this should do is every frame it's going to rotate this by 50 units. Right? So I'll just go ahead and hit play. Let that run. There we go. As you can see, this thing is running like crazy now. And the video may or may not be running as fast as I'm seeing it here on the screen, but it's pretty quick. But you'll notice that I have no way to affect the speed of this. This is because, we'll just hit stop here. That's because the code here is hard-coded in, right? There's no way I can change this. If I want to be able to change this, I can just grab my myFloat variable here. I'll just copy and paste it over my 50. Hit save, right? So instead of 0, I'm saying my float, which is equal to 1.5, right? So I'll just save that again, run over to Unity, it'll auto update. We'll hit play, and look at that. It's slower. Now, if I want to speed it up, I can just grab my myFloat variable, and increase the speed at which this runs. So what variables do is they make information accessible, right? If I want to be able to change a value while I'm playing the game, this could be a button input, this could be a joystick input, it could be anything. It makes it accessible from code, and I can change it instead of just having it locked in and running while I play. Well, that's everything for variables right now. I think in another video I might talk a little bit more about like Boolean options and things like that, but it's going to involve a few more complex structures. And so I think we'll revisit the variable topic in later lessons so you kind of get a better sense of what it is. And we'll go over it at the time. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment. If you like this video, go ahead and leave a like. If you want to see more of these videos, or if you want to receive updates as far as when they come out, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you have any suggestions of things that you'd like to learn a little bit more about, I can put those as prioritized lessons and get those out sooner. Otherwise, we will see you next time.